Welcome to AAT Learning Hub. Today's talk will focus on the bones of the appendicular skeleton. This is the first part of a two-part series on this topic. The bone that we'll be discussing first is the collarbone, also known as the clavicle. The clavicle is a long sigmoid bone that connects the axial and the appendicular skeleton. This enables significant function and range of motion of the upper extremity. Additionally, it protects neurovascular structures in the posterior part of the body. In the superior view, the acromial and sternal ends can be seen, while the inferior view displays the shaft, trapezoid line, conoid tubercle, subclavian groove, and costal tuberosity of the clavicle. Moving on to the scapula, which is also known as the shoulder blade. It is a flat, triangular bone that provides attachment sites for 17 different muscles. The scapula connects the upper limb to the trunk and articulates with the humerus at the glenohumeral joint and with the clavicle at the acromioclavicular joint. The scapula's costal surface features the acromion, the coracoid process, the glenoid fossa, and the subscapular fossa. The lateral surface of the scapula includes the supraglenoid tubercle, the glenoid fossa, and the infraglenoid tubercle. The scapula's posterior surface includes the supraspinatus fossa, acromion, glenoid fossa, spine of scapula, and infraspinatus fossa. Articulations for the scapula include the acromioclavicular joint between the scapula's acromion and the clavicle, and the glenohumeral joint between the glenoid fossa of the scapula and the head of the humerus. Let us talk about the humerus bone, which is a long bone in the upper limb extending from the shoulder to the elbow. At the glenohumeral joint, located at the proximal end of the humerus bone, it connects with the scapula bone. At the distal end, it articulates with the head of the radius and trochlear notch of the ulna, forming the elbow joint. Proximal landmarks for the humerus include the anatomical neck, the greater tuberosity, the surgical neck, the humeral head, the intertubercular groove, the lesser tuberosity, and the deltoid tuberosity. The upper part of the humerus bone, known as the proximal humerus, is made up of several components. These include the head, anatomical neck, greater and lesser tuberosity, and intertubercular sulcus. The greater tuberosity is situated on the lateral side of the humerus and has both anterior and posterior surfaces. On the other hand, the lesser tuberosity is smaller and located more medially on the bone with only an anterior surface. The intertubercular sulcus is a deep groove that separates the two tuberosities. The surgical neck extends from just below the tuberosities to the shaft of the humerus. The humerus is a bone that has various muscles attached to it. The humeral shaft is circular at top and flattened at the bottom. On the lateral side of the humeral shaft, there is a rough surface known as the deltoid tuberosity, where the deltoid muscle attaches. The radial or spiral groove is a shallow depression running diagonally down the back of the humerus, parallel to the deltoid tuberosity. In this groove, the radial nerve and the profunda brachii artery are located. Along the shaft of the humerus, there are several muscles attached, including coracobrachialis, deltoid, brachialis, brachioradialis, and the medial and lateral heads of the triceps. The distal part of the humerus has two borders, which are the lateral and the medial borders. These borders create the medial and lateral supraepicondylar ridges. Just below these ridges, there are extra capsular bone projections called the lateral and medial epicondyles, which can be felt at the elbow. The trochlea is located medially and extends to the back of the bone. On the lateral side of the trochlea is the capitulum, which is the part of the bone that articulates with the radius. There are three depressions on the distal part of the humerus, which are known as the coronoid, radial, and olecranon fossae. The proximal part of the humerus connects with the glenoid fossa of the scapula to create the shoulder joint, also known as the glenohumeral joint. The distal part of the humerus makes up the elbow joint, where the capitulum of the humerus connects with the head of the radius and the trochlea of the humerus connects with the trochlear notch of the ulna. The radius is a bone in the forearm that runs parallel to the ulna. It rotates around the ulna, allowing for movement in the radial joints. The proximal end of the radius is the site where it articulates with the elbow and proximal radio-ulnar joints. Some important bony landmarks in this region are the head, neck, and the radial tuberosity. The head of the radius is a disc-shaped structure with a concave articulating surface. It is thicker medially where it takes part in the proximal radio-ulnar joint. The neck of the radius is a narrow area of the bone that lies between the radial head and the radial tuberosity. The radial tuberosity is a bony projection that serves as the attachment site for the biceps brachii muscles. The radial shaft, like the ulna, is triangular with three borders and surfaces. As it moves distally, it expands in diameter and forms a rectangular end. The styloid process projects distally on the lateral side. On the medial surface, there is a concavity known as ulnar notch. This notch articulates with the head of the ulna, creating the distal radio-ulnar joint. The distal surface of the radius has two facets that connect with the scaphoid and lunate carpal bones, forming the wrist joint. The radius bone connects to four different joints in the body. The elbow joint is formed by the head of the radius bone connecting with the capitulum of the humerus bone. The proximal radio-ulnar joint is formed by the radial head connecting with the radial notch of the ulnar bone. The wrist joint is formed by the distal end of the radius bone connecting with the carpal bones. Lastly, the distal radio-ulnar joint is formed by the ulnar notch connecting with the head of the ulnar bone. Let us now dive into the topic of the ulna, which is a lengthy bone located in the forearm. It is positioned parallel to the radius, the second bone in the forearm, and is placed medially. The ulna is responsible for stabilizing the forearm, whereas the radius pivots to generate movement. The ulna articulates with the humerus at the elbow joint proximally, while distally it articulates with the radius, forming the distal radio-ulnar joint. The proximal ulna has some important landmarks which are as follows. Olecranon is a bony projection present in the elbow and can be easily felt as the tip. The upper surface of the olecranon is where the triceps brachii muscle attaches. Anteriorly, a ridge bone projects outwards, forming the coronoid process, which is a part of the trochlear notch. The trochlear notch is wrench-shaped, formed by the olecranon and coronoid process, and articulates with the humerus trochlea. The radial notch present on the lateral surface of the trochlear notch articulates with the head of the radius. The rough patch present just below the coronoid process is called the tuberosity of the ulna and is the attachment site of the brachialis muscle. The shaft of the ulna is triangular shaped structure that has three borders and three surfaces. The anterior surface serves as a site of attachment for the pronator quadratus muscle distally. The posterior surface is a site of attachment for many muscles, and the medial surface is unremarkable. The three borders include the posterior border, which is palpable along the entire length of the forearm posteriorly. The interosseous border serves as a site of attachment of interosseous membrane, which spans the distance between the two forearm bones. Lastly, the anterior border is unremarkable. The carpal bones consist of 8 irregularly shaped bones in the wrist area. The metacarpal bones are related to these carpal bones, and there are 5 metacarpals, each corresponding to a digit. The phalanges are the bones of the fingers, and each finger has 3 except for the thumb, which has 2. The various carpal bones are hamate, trapezoid, trapezium, capitate, scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and pisiform. These are the various metacarpal bones and the phalanges. If you enjoy the content of